I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice, till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNRadio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNRadio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNRadio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNRadio.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice.
And welcome in America and Oklahoma and around the world. I know we've got lots of folks listening all over the place. It seems like our numbers just keep growing. I know it doesn't always show up on the live feeds, and I get trolls on YouTube that like to point out that nobody listens, but they can't see the behind-the-scenes numbers. Anyway, it is officially Wednesday, which also means it is Chat Lives Matter Day.
Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Cutting through the lies, shining light where the shadow hides.
Again, otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day, right here live on KLRNRadio.com. In case you guys thought I faked that part, no, that was actually me. Anyway, so we're here. We're live. It's Wednesday. I know it's been a minute. Took an extra day off earlier in the week. Had a lot of stressful things going on, and it kind of made me kind of sink into a bit of a depression. And then I also had a bit of an ick feeling for about the last 2 weeks again. I feel like I might, knock on wood, might be coming out the other side of it now. So we're going to do our best to get through the whole show today and see how things go. Also, I'll be back tonight for a special 2-hour Kingdom and Country. I've got some makeup to do, and I figured today's the perfect time to do a show that I've been putting off for a while because I wasn't sure I would be able to get through it, and I think I can now. This one's going to be all about loss and why Christians still feel it, even though a lot of people that our atheists are like, why are Christians so sad when people die if they know they're going to see them again? We're going to get into that in detail tonight, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here live on KLRNRadio.com. And again, I'm here. I'm live. It's Wednesday. Hopefully some chatters start showing up in a minute. It's kind of quiet around here. But if not, I still have show notes anyway. So let's get into it, shall we? So again, welcome into the program. Again, I am Rick Robinson. And today we have one of those shows that some of you are going to like and some of you are not going to like. And if there's any YouTube trolls that show up, they will hate it, but that's okay. So every story seems to come back to the same basic question for everything we're going to be talking about. What happened when the people in charge, or what happens when the people in charge ask us to trust them, but the systems designed to earn that trust either fail, get ignored, or never actually existed in the first place? So what we're going to be talking about today is, of course, the artificial intelligence arms race, the growing rebellion against data centers, the death and complicated legacy of Senator Lindsey Graham, threats against the Supreme Court, Jack Smith and the text messages his investigators reviewed involving dozens of members of Congress, the Save America Act, and a couple of Oklahoma stories that deserve more attention than they are getting. But we begin with Immigration and Customs Enforcement because the administration managed to create almost 24 hours of confusion over whether ICE agents would still be allowed to stop vehicles or not. And underneath that confusion are two men who are dead. Two fatal shootings 6 days apart. Two drivers who were apparently not the original targets of the immigration operation that ended with them being shot. Two cases in which the Department of Homeland Security says a vehicle was used or was about to be used as a weapon. And two cases in which the publicly available evidence does not yet give us a clear enough picture to declare that every claim made by either side has been proven. However, I will say, I have seen images of at least one of these shootings where it does, in point of fact, show the shots were coming from the front of the vehicle. So we'll get into that a little bit later, though. And that is where we need to begin, with what we know, what the government says, what the witnesses say, and what remains unresolved. Because this discussion is already being forced into the same stupid binary choice that consumes almost every national issue. Either ICE agents are rampaging executioners who should no longer be allowed to conduct immigration enforcement, or supporting ICE means automatically defending every decision made by every agent during every encounter. Those are not the only choices, however. You can support immigration enforcement. You can recognize that vehicles can be used as deadly weapons. And so far, in every bit that I have seen, that has been the case, although the media doesn't want you to know that. The interesting thing is, you remember Obama's border guy got a medal for doing what he did and got all kinds of praise for deporting 900,000 illegals during Obama's term? Everybody remember that? Guess what? Trump's border czar is the same guy, Tom Homan. And the only thing that seems to be different is the way the media is telling the story. But we can still demand that fatal shootings be investigated, that agents use sound tactics, and that body cameras be functioning, especially when lives wind up being taken. That's not anti-law enforcement. That is what law enforcement is actually supposed to mean. So the controversy exploded after DHS ordered ICE officers to temporarily suspend most non-urgent vehicle stops nationwide. The order followed two fatal shootings during vehicle encounters, one in Houston on July 7th and another in Bedford, Maine on July 13th. The pause reportedly still allowed stops involving criminal warrants, joint operations, emergencies, and other urgent circumstances. But for routine immigration enforcement, agents were being told to pull back from one of the primary ways they locate and arrest people away from homes, workplaces, or courthouses. And you could hear the frustration almost immediately. A significant number of ICE arrests begin with surveillance and end when the individual gets into a vehicle. Agents may know where somebody lives, but prefer not to enter the home. They may know where somebody works, but want to avoid creating a scene inside a business. The other issue with that is, and a lot of folks that don't work in law enforcement don't know this, but guess what? Businesses are considered private property with public access. They do not have to allow law enforcement individuals on the premises unless or until they have an actual warrant. You know how I know? Because I've worked both sides of that, and I used to work private security, and I turned people away all the time because I would call management, and they would say, do they have a warrant? And I would say no, then tell them to come back with a warrant. And that's just how it is. So there's a lot of reasons why the best place, especially in places where there's sanctuary cities, sanctuary states, sanctuary policies, is traffic stops, is because it's one of the places that doesn't really get covered by any of that stuff. So the vehicle stop can be controlled. It can be the controlled moment between those two locations. At least it's supposed to be controlled. Tom Homan went on television and tried to calm the reaction. He said this was not a permanent policy change. It was a short pause intended to examine the tactics being used and determine whether agents could make arrests before suspects entered vehicles. He also made the point that if agents can arrest someone outside the car, they remove the possibility that the vehicle becomes a 2-ton weapon. Now, I happen to agree with that assessment. If we already know the targets, I don't really understand why we're letting them get into cars unless we're tailing them to a location to see if maybe there's other people they can nab before they do the traffic stops. But yeah, if you're already on them, you're already surveilling them, and you can see them leaving the area and getting into a car. I mean, unless you're just afraid that there's like a mob that's going to come out, which is possible, I don't really understand why they aren't stopping them before they actually get to the point of being able to turn a vehicle into a 2-ton weapon. And again, that is a fair operational point. But the way DHS handled this made it look less like a deliberate tactic review and more like panic at the top of the department. 1 minute, agents were being told vehicle assaults had increased dramatically and that their lives were at risk. The next minute, one of their most important enforcement tools was being suspended nationwide. And then President Trump said, nah, we ain't doing that. Trump publicly stepped in and made clear that ICE would not abandon vehicle stops. So now we have the policy whiplash. DHS says pause. Homan says temporary review. ICE personnel say this will damage their enforcement options. Trump says the stops will continue, and the public is left asking the obvious question. Who was actually in charge? Was this considered a response to 2 fatal encounters? Was it an order issued under political pressure? Did the secretary make the decision without the White House fully on board? Or did the administration simply realize that suspending vehicle stops sounded like capitulation and reverse course before the political damage spread? If I had to take my guess, I'd say it's probably that last one. Because I have seen a lot of people, even on my side of the argument, complaining that they felt like DHS caved to public pressure. So I honestly think that probably has a lot to do with it. And again, it's just silly to me to take something like this off the table. This is happening in a lot of places. I have seen a lot of local law enforcement areas where they are starting to cut back on vehicle intercepts, etc., for supposed public safety reasons, which in a lot of cases means they have people running around doing dangerous things and basically, they're just kind of watching. Problem with that is this goes back to something that I talked about almost 2-3 years ago at this point, when the Supreme Court basically said that police officers have the same rights and responsibilities as security officers, which is basically to observe and report, and they're not legally required to do anything. At the time, I knew that was going to be a bad precedent. And I think in a lot of ways, it's made things even worse because now nobody really knows what their job description is. They know they've taken an oath. They have, in a lot of cases, mayors and chiefs that don't support them when they do things that they feel they are, by their oath, required to do. So to me, this is kind of a microcosm of the same thing that we're seeing with our youth in America. There are way too many benchmarks now that tell somebody when they're considered an adult for various different reasons. And I think that's causing a lot of confusion. We're having the same problem here now because you have people that don't like the cops, that don't want them to do anything, that would prefer that social workers go out on routine visits, etc., when 911 is called. So you have cops that don't know what they're supposed to do depending on what areas they work. And I think that is, again, part of what's causing this overall confusion. So whichever of the answers is actually correct, and I still stand by my assertion, this was not handled like a confident, coordinated law enforcement policy. And that matters because confusion at the top eventually becomes danger on the street. Agents need to know the rules before an encounter begins. They need to know when to stop a vehicle, when to disengage, when to pursue, when to reposition, and when deadly force is justified. You cannot improvise national policy after every shooting, but you also cannot refuse to reassess tactics simply because the people demanding answers happen to be political opponents. This is where the administration needs to be smarter than the activist class. The activists want to use these deaths to cripple ICE. They want to portray the entire enforcement mission as illegitimate. The correct response is not to pretend the deaths raise no questions. The correct response is to answer those questions better than the activists can exploit them. So as we get further into this, just as a reminder, the first shooting happened in Houston on July 7th. Lorenzo Salgado Arroyo, a 52-year-old Mexican national who had lived in the Houston area for decades, was driving a van carrying members of a construction crew. He, at the time, was not the intended target of the ICE operation. According to DHS and local reporting, agents believed the van resembled one associated with the person they were seeking. DHS says Salgado rammed a government vehicle, ignored commands, and attempted to use the van to strike an officer. Now, taking all of that at face value, if this is what occurred, this is just another version of FAFO. Because if you are dumb enough when cops are coming at you to try to kill them with a 2-ton weapon, you kind of deserve what happens to you. So according to the official accounts that have been given, the officer fired because he believed he faced an imminent threat. 3 men who were inside the van, surprise, surprise, dispute that account. Through their attorney, they said no agent was directly in front of the vehicle and that the officer fired through the passenger side window. They said Salgado did not attempt to run over an officer. Those are radically different versions of the same event. And right now, neither version has been conclusively established for the public. There is surveillance video showing unmarked vehicles following the van before the shooting and footage from the aftermath, but no publicly released video clearly captures the entire moment in which the shots were fired. There is no publicly available body cam footage that resolves the dispute. The Harris County District Attorney is conducting an investigation, but local officials have complained about difficulty obtaining full cooperation and evidence from federal authorities. The Texas Rangers said they had not opened an investigation because they had not received a formal request from the federal or local authorities to do so. And that is not good enough. If DHS is confident the shooting was justified, it should want the investigation to be thorough and transparent. If the van rammed a federal vehicle, document it. If the officer was in danger, show the positioning. If the passengers are wrong, establish why they are wrong. However, this is where I'm going to differ from my notes a little bit, because I do agree with everything that's in my notes or it wouldn't be in there. But I will say this, it's going to take time to verify all of this stuff. It's going to take going through the footage and seeing exactly what happened, assuming that the body cameras were on and active, and they should have been. But I will say this, I would much rather err on the side of caution and trust law enforcement than to take the word of people that, already aren't happy that these people are here in the first place. So I'm always going to come down on the side of law enforcement unless or until I see proof otherwise. And that's just the way it is. But again, trust test can't be the final evidentiary standard when a man who was not the target of the operation ends up dead. That does not mean the officer is guilty of a crime. It means the government has the burden of explaining what its agents did. But the government always has that burden. So 6 days later, another ICE vehicle encounter ended with another driver dead. Sebastian Dern Guerrero, a Colombian national in his mid-20s, was shot by an ICE officer in Bedford, Maine. And once again, he was not apparently the person ICE originally intended to arrest. Agents were surveilling a residence associated with someone who had a final order of removal. Dern Guerrero left that residence in a vehicle, and agents attempted to stop him. DHS says he attempted to flee. The agency initially described the officer as firing while fearing for public safety. Other administration descriptions emphasized the idea that the vehicle had been weaponized or posed a danger to agents. Security footage captures portions of the encounter and the sound of gunfire, but it does not show enough to resolve the central use of force question. Witnesses have offered accounts that complicate the government's version. Protesters and immigration advocates have already declared the shooting unjustified. Surprise, surprise. Colombia's government has demanded answers. Again, the danger here is deciding what happened based solely on which political team you support. A moving vehicle can and has absolutely been used as a weapon. How do I know? Because it's been done to me. Officers have been struck. dragged, pinned, and killed by drivers attempting to flee. DHS says its personnel experienced more than 180 vehicle attacks that happened during an earlier period of the current enforcement campaign. That is the department's count, but it demonstrates that the threat is not imaginary. But the existence of vehicle attacks in other cases does not automatically establish that deadly force was justified in this case. The standard is not vehicles can be dangerous. The standard is whether officers reasonably believed there was an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury at the moment the weapon was fired. That is a fact-specific question. Where was the officer standing? Which direction was the vehicle moving? Was the officer trapped? Did agents create additional danger by positioning themselves in front of the car? That, in my opinion, is not a valid question. Shouldn't matter if they put themselves in front of the car. Because if they put themselves in the front of the car, it was because they feared the person was going to be trying to flee, most likely at high speeds, and they were hoping if they put themselves between their exit and the vehicle, they would not be dumb enough to try to ram them. So, yes, I left that question in there on purpose, but only so that I could refute it, because I myself, in violation of department policy, in violation of the rule handbook that I wrote for my own agents when I worked private security, have done the exact same thing to protect passerbys. Because sometimes you have to. Now, could the arrests have been made later? Those questions matter. Former ICE personnel and other law enforcement professionals have repeatedly warned officers not to stand directly in front of vehicles during stops whenever that can be avoided. Not because the suspect has a right to flee, not because the officer should surrender, because placing yourself in the vehicle's path can create a deadly force encounter that did not have to happen. And again, I disagree. Because while these agents are telling their subordinates, do not put yourself between a vehicle and the road, again, you can't always say that. Because I'm going to say this again, going back to, what was it, the Renee Good case, I think was her name, the one where she gunned it grinning at the cops, and if not for the fact that her wheels had spun, she would have been heading right for the officer when she gunned it. That's, if they're willing to do that to an officer, how much more willing would they be to run over people that happen to be in the way? That's why I disagree with some of these assertions, because you cannot have a blanket policy that says under no circumstances should you do this, because each situation is different. That's one of the reasons why, for as long as I have done this, one of the things that I hate hearing the most from the media is officers slain during routine traffic stop. Because there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. Everyone is different. Everyone has the potential outcome of somebody winding up dead if you are not careful and if you are not vigilant. And I'm sorry, 9 times out of 10, if I'm afraid somebody's going to flee the scene and potentially do so while endangering other folks, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to stop them. Now, granted, I'm old now and don't do any of this stuff at all anymore. But if I did, these would still be the decisions that I have made, and those are decisions that I have made in the past. But again, tactics exist to keep officers alive, suspects alive, and bystanders alive, which is why I say that each one of these times that somebody's putting themselves between a vehicle and the road, people should be looking at the entire set of circumstances that may have made it feel necessary for them to do so. But this does bring us back to the body cameras. How are we still having fatal federal law enforcement encounters without any reliable body camera footage? We have cameras on doorbells. We have cameras in parking lots. We have cameras inside convenience stores, restaurants, elevators, buses, and even traffic lights. Everybody in America is carrying a camera in his or her pocket, in his or her pocket. But when a federal agent fires a weapon and kills someone, the public is told there may be no body camera recording that conclusively shows what occurred. That should actually bother everybody. It should bother the left because transparency protects the public. It should bother the right because transparency protects officers against false accusations. A camera does not guarantee justice. It can be blocked. It can miss an angle. It can fail. It can show only part of an encounter. But it is better than forcing the entire country to choose between a DHS press statement and a witness statement, especially if they contradict one another. If the officer acted correctly, the camera may be his strongest defense. If the officer acted improperly, the camera may be the only reason accountability happens. And if the officer actually acted improperly and the camera supports that, that can be used as a training tool for other agents in the future and to determine what punishment, if any, should happen to the officer or the agent. Either way, the answer cannot be that the nation simply picks whichever narrative fits its current political bend. The left is going to say these shootings prove ICE cannot be trusted with vehicle stops. That's way too vague. Vehicle stops are a normal and necessary law enforcement tool. An agency cannot conduct an immigration enforcement campaign while eliminating every encounter that carries risk, especially in sanctuary cities and states. The answer cannot be to stop making arrests, but the right cannot answer the left by treating every government account as sacred. We spent years warning that federal agencies can abuse power. I've shown that over and over again on this show. We warned that bureaucracies can and do protect themselves. We've warned that official narratives can be incomplete, misleading, or politically shaped. Those principles do not suddenly disappear because the agency involved is enforcing a policy we support. Law and order is not blind loyalty to a badge. Law and order means laws, rules, evidence, due process, and consequences when those rules are violated. Tom Holman gave the correct standard when he said that if officers acted outside policy or acted illegally, they should be held accountable. That should not be controversial. And accountability does not weaken ICE. Done correctly, it actually strengthens ICE. An agency that investigates questionable conduct, corrects bad tactics, equips its officers properly, and releases evidence when legally possible earns more legitimacy, not less. An agency that treats every question as an attack creates the suspicion that it has something to hide. So here's where I land. Resume the vehicle stops. Do not surrender an essential enforcement tool because activists demand it. But we do need to establish clear national tactics for conducting these stops. Get the agents out of the path of moving vehicles when possible. And again, I'm going to use that caveat, when possible, because again, most of the time, if an agent is putting themselves between a vehicle and its exit point, it's usually for the means of protecting bystanders. Now this is something, and this goes out to every bit of law enforcement. If your job is actually deterrence, we need to get back to clearly marked vehicles. This is happening everywhere. Like in this, I live next to a small city and a town that is basically just a village. And even the town that is basically just a village has blacked out cop cars. You don't even know they are cop cars till they light you up. Now, if your job is deterrence and not ticket writing, then you shouldn't be having to hide who you are. And that is a hill I'm willing to die on. Now, if you are a part of a tactical enforcement group or you're somebody that goes out and serves warrants, then yes, you should be able to hide your identity until you need to be able to present who you are. But if your job is typically traffic stops, traffic enforcement, things like that, there's no reason for you to not identify who you are and have your vehicles plainly visible. Because one, that's gonna help people that may have, and this happened to me a little over a year ago. I'm just cruising through the little town and went over a hill and didn't realize that, hey, you forgot to tap your brakes coming off that hill because the speed limit went from 40 to 30 really quick. And I got stopped doing 37 and a 30 by a completely blacked out vehicle. Where if I had seen them and known what they were, I might have looked down and went, oh, I didn't realize I was still going that fast. Let me fix that. So again, used marked vehicles are clearly identifiable law enforcement signals when operational security permits, require functioning body cameras, preserve the evidence, including chain of custody, cooperate with legitimate investigations, and when the dead driver was not even the person agents originally intended to arrest, understand that the government owes the public a complete explanation. Backing ICE does not require pretending ICE can never make a mistake. Support the mission, protect the officers, demand the cameras, investigate the shootings. That is law and order, not automatic condemnation and not automatic absolution. And when we come back, we're moving from a government enforcement fight to an economic fight that may decide who controls the next generation of technology, America or China. New York has paused permits for new hyperscale data centers. John Fetterman says that means China wins, which is not, again, making him very happy with his Democratic cohorts. But in Wisconsin, anger over electric bills, water, land, and corporate subsidies is giving a Democratic socialist an opening with voters who supported Donald Trump. So the question is not simply whether America should build data centers. The question is who pays for them and whether Republicans are about to hand socialists another working class issue by defending corporate welfare and calling it capitalism. That's next. This is the Rick Robinson Show. We are up against a break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We were born to stand and never bow again. Let the fire of liberty forever reign. Forever reign. Now the walls are shaking from the battle cry. Truth is rising to the sky. Every soul that ever felt the weight of chains feels the fire of freedom in their veins. No more chains, no more lies. Hear the thunder as we rise. Freedom's call won't be denied. Now the fire burns worldwide. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We were born to stand and never bow again. Let the fire of liberty forever reign. Let the fire of liberty forever reign. Grab your coffee, raise that flag, stand your ground, never wave that rag. News with a backbone, voice of the free. Rick's got the pulse of liberty. It's a Rick Robinson Show, bold, unafraid. Truth bombs dropping, a red state parade from the flame.
And as soon as I remember to unmute, welcome back into the program, ladies Ladies and gentlemen, yes, Stephen, I agree. Uneducated and poorly trained police are as frustrating as dealing with magistrates who do not have law degrees. I don't know about that second part, but I do know that cops that don't have proper training are annoying. That's where I'm going to leave that. Welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it is Chat Lives Matter Day right here live on KLRN Radio. I am Rick Robinson. Still recuperating, but feeling better. All right, so where were we before the break? Oh, yeah, that's right. So, there's been a democratic socialist surge here in America. We've talked about it on this show, but now they're glomming onto a populist issue that may actually be peeling off some Trump voters, which should terrify everyone. It should. I don't know if it will, but it should. So, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about government power, enforcement, and the obligations that come with asking the public to trust the people exercising the power that we've given them. Now we're moving into a different kind of power: electrical power, computing power, corporate power, and political power, and potentially the power to decide whether the United States or China leads the next generation of technology. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has ordered a 1-year pause on new hyperscale data center permits while the state develops a broader framework for electricity demand, water use, environmental effects, zoning, utility cost, and the impact those facilities have on the surrounding communities. That's not a total ban on data centers. The existing facilities can continue operating, and projects that already completed the relevant state permitting process, which, knowing New York, was probably a pain in the ass, are not halted by the current order. For purposes of New York's order, the pause applies to new hyperscale facilities expecting to use 50 megawatts or more. For those of you who need to put that in some sort of a scale, that is the kind of power demand often compensated or compared, I don't know why I said compensated, with tens of thousands of homes. And when Hoochie announced the pause, Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman responded with 2 words, quote unquote, China wins. That is the beginning of the argument. However, it is not the whole argument. Fetterman's warning is not ridiculous. Artificial intelligence does not exist in the clouds. Maybe in the cloud, but not the clouds. That phrase makes it sound as though these systems are floating somewhere above us, weightless and invisible. But they are not. They exist inside enormous buildings packed with servers. Those servers require electricity. They produce heat. The heat requires cooling. The facilities need transmission lines, substations, land backup systems, and access to a reliable electric grid. And they need all of it consistently, because an artificial intelligence system cannot lead the world if somebody has to unplug it every afternoon when the temperature reaches 102 degrees. Have you tried turning it off and turning it on again? The country that builds the computing capacity will have an enormous advantage in artificial intelligence. That advantage will affect defense, medicine, manufacturing, intelligence, which kind of sounds weird to say again, but I guess anyway. Finance, logistics, and nearly every major industry likely to dominate the next several decades. China understands the assignment. Its government can override local opposition and move major infrastructure projects with a speed no American democracy should try to imitate, because we can't. America does not operate that way, and I'm glad that it doesn't. But democracy, property rights, local control, and environmental safeguards cannot become excuses for national paralysis. There is a legitimate strategic danger in allowing every major infrastructure project to be delayed, litigated, studied, restudied, challenged, and eventually finally abandoned after all of this happens. We've done that with pipelines, mines, transmission, factories, and nuclear power. We do the same thing with artificial intelligence infrastructure. And if we do that, and it seems like we're heading in that direction, Fetterman might ultimately be right, because China will win. But the phrase cannot become a magic spell used to end every policy discussion, because there is another side to this. China also benefits if America builds this infrastructure so recklessly that families, farmers, small towns, and working class voters begin seeing the entire AI project as a threat. Have you guys not seen the Terminator? The entire AI project is a threat. Yes, we've seen these movies. Just saying. China benefits if ordinary Americans are told that they must pay higher electric bills so that one of the richest technology companies in human history can train a better chatbot. China benefits if homeowners lose land through eminent domain while corporate developers receive more and more tax incentives. China benefits if local water supplies are stretched, utility systems are overwhelmed, and communities are told that asking questions makes them enemies of progress. I want to stop right there because I've read a couple of different articles that seem to try to dispel most of the things that everybody's worried about today with modern data centers, because a lot of the studies and the stress points were done in previous generations of AI data centers that were, in fact, power guzzling whores. The newer ones seem to streamline the process a bit, so I don't know how much of this is actually still legitimate and how much of it is just a talking point. I will say this. I think we need to start seriously looking at other ways to make data centers happen. Like, I've seen studies where there are now countries that are considering putting them on the ocean floor. I don't know how well that would work if something goes sideways, but it definitely takes care of a lot of the cooling problems. But again, calling people enemies of progress, it may be a fun thing to do from my side of the aisle because progress and progressivism have become dirty words. But at the same time, America actually needs data centers because it's not sustainable to keep calling these people enemies of progress. The real question is who pays for these data centers, because the bill always goes somewhere. Even with all of the socialist wet dreams that are being punched out in campaign bumper stickers this cycle, the bill always goes somewhere. No matter what we're talking about, every time a politician announces a major economic development project, the public is shown the benefits, which include things like jobs, investments, tax revenue, construction, growth, innovation, a fancy ribbon cutting ceremony, lots of hard hats, a podium, a giant pair of scissors. What the public is not always shown, the invoice. Who pays for this new generation? Who pays for the transmission lines? Who pays for the substation? Who bears the risk if the project closes? Who covers the gap if the company receives a tax exemption? Who pays if residential rates increase? Who provides the water? Who carries the burden when the company negotiating the deals has more lawyers, accountants, lobbyists, and political influence than the town itself? Those costs do not disappear. They move. Sometimes they move on to the taxpayer. Sometimes they move on to utility customers, which would be one and the same. Sometimes they move on to property owners. Sometimes they move into public debt. And sometimes politicians like to call that capitalism, but it isn't. A company investing its own money, bearing its own risk, paying its own infrastructure costs, and competing in a market is capitalism in its truest sense. A company demanding subsidies, preferential rates, public infrastructure, tax exemptions, and legal advantages while keeping the profits for itself, that's something else entirely. It may still be considered economic development. It may even be industrial policy. It may be a strategic national investment. Sometimes it may even be justified. But let us stop pretending it is the same thing as the free market, because every time government socializes big tech costs while privatizing big tech's profits, it writes another campaign commercial for the Democratic Socialists. And that brings us to Wisconsin, because there's a socialist in Wisconsin who found a Republican issue. Francesca Hong is running for the governorship of Wisconsin. She is a state representative. She is or was a chef by trade. She owned a restaurant once. That failed. She went deeply into debt. She was sued. She has the kind of biography that sounds familiar to millions of people who tried to build something, watched the numbers stop working, and discovered that one bad year can erase a full decade of effort. I've been there, done that. Hong also openly identifies as a democratic socialist or a commie. Let's just start calling it what it is. And her broader agenda is not moderate. Her wider platform includes a state-owned bank, expensive government benefits, a $20 minimum wage, higher taxes on wealthy residents, and major changes to policing. But that's not how she's reaching some Republican voters. She's reaching them through, you guessed it, data centers. Hong has called for a one-year moratorium on new data center construction in Wisconsin. She calls the proposal Control-Alt-Delete. That's kind of snazzy. And in communities facing major proposed developments, her message is landing with some people who voted for Donald Trump. Not because they suddenly became socialists, not because they joined the Democratic Socialists of America. They are listening because she's talking about their electric bills, their water bills, the possibility of their land not being taken away through eminent domain, their town being crushed by these new expenditures, their tax dollars, and the feeling that large corporations are receiving special treatment while ordinary residents are expected to absorb the consequences. One Trump voter featured in the reporting said he did not care about Hong's ideological label. He cared that she opposed the data center near his home. Another conservative voter spoke with her about mental health services and teacher pay and came away saying she seemed focused on the issues. A woman who had spoken with Hong expressed surprise when she later learned that Hong was a Democratic socialist. Her reaction was essentially, well, she seemed so sensible. That should worry Republicans, not because every one of those voters will ultimately support her. The evidence of crossover support is still anecdotal. Hong has not yet proven that she is building a statewide coalition of Trump voters along with socialists. She still has to survive a crowded Democratic primary, but she has demonstrated something more important. She has found an issue on which the ideological label that she supports and spouts becomes secondary. The most effective socialist candidate is not the one who begins by explaining socialism. It is the one who finds the issue where the public already believes corporations and government have sold them out. Then the candidate says, I see what is happening to you. I know who's benefiting and I know who's paying. And I am the only person willing to stop it. That's the opening. That's the wedge in the formation. The voter does not begin by embracing socialism. The voter begins by believing the socialist is the only candidate taking their problems that bother them seriously. Republicans cannot respond to that by shouting socialist and expecting the label to do all the work. The label matters, but again, most people below the age of 30 don't view socialism the way that we do. The broader platform matters. The governing consequences matter. But first, Republicans have to answer to the grievance. If the electric bill is rising, answer it. If the company is receiving tax subsidies, explain them. If eminent domain is involved, then you need to explain it in ways that people can understand why that had to be used. If the community bears the infrastructure cost, tell the public why. If the project will create permanent jobs, provide the numbers. If the fears are exaggerated, then prove it. And if the deal really does shift private cost onto the public, you should probably stop defending it. Republicans cannot defend crony capitalism anymore. They can't do that all week long and then act shocked when voters become curious about socialism on Sunday. The Wisconsin Rapids Project is a good example of why this discussion requires more than slogans. The proposed site is not untouched wilderness. It is part of a former paper mill property. The land includes old industrial infrastructure, buried concrete, a landfill, and it even comes with its own bit of contamination, potentially. It is not an obvious site for a new residential neighborhood. Developers and local reporting also indicate that the proposed data center may use less water than the old industrial operation did. Those facts matter. If we're going to criticize developers and politicians for hiding costs, we cannot hide facts that complicate the anti-data center narrative. But the project still raises legitimate questions. What will it require from the grid? Who pays for the electric system expansion? What tax arrangements are being offered? What permanent employment will this create after the construction ends? What happens if the company's plans change? What commitments are enforceable? What control does the community retain? Those are not anti-technology questions. They are the questions responsible adults ask before signing a long-term agreement. The pro-data center side needs to stop treating every critic as a Luddite. The anti-data center side needs to stop pretending every proposed site is a pristine family farm about to be covered in concrete. And the politicians need to stop hiding behind the two easiest slogans available. jobs in China. All right, America needs a national AI infrastructure strategy, which is going to be hard to do, but I happen to agree. Not 50 unrelated state strategies, not thousands of local fights in which every town has to reinvent the entire regulatory process, not a system in which large technology companies negotiate quietly with utilities and development authorities while residents learn the details after the major commitments have already been made. A national strategy. That strategy should include abundant energy. If we're serious about AI, we need more generation. That means natural gas. It means nuclear power. It means transmission. It means grid modernization. It means storage where storage makes sense. And it means firm generation and backup capable of supporting demand when intermittent sources are not producing. And whether we're talking about AI or not, that all still needs to happen. We have way too many circumstances in this country where we have brownouts happening all the time. California, how long have they been having rolling brownouts? Especially during summer months, to try to keep their grid from becoming overloaded. These are the same people that wanted electrical vehicle charging stations everywhere. The same people complaining about the power generation from these AI centers were the same ones that wanted Teslas in every driveway until Elon Musk became fiscally conservative. The problem with this, though, is you cannot responsibly plan a hyperscale computing boom around intermittent power without enormous amounts of firm generation, storage, transmission, or backup. Data centers should also bear the direct costs they create. If a facility requires a dedicated substation, the facility that requires the dedicated substation should be the one paying for it. If it requires new transmission lines, the primary users should bear that expense. If it requires new power generation, the company should finance, contract for, or help build that generation. Residential customers should not automatically subsidize industrial demand. If the project receives tax incentives, the public should see the agreement in toto. If the company promises jobs, the agreement should define what counts as a job, how long those jobs must remain, and what happens if the promise is not fulfilled. If water is a concern, disclose the expected use. If backup generators create emissions or noise, you should probably tell them about that too. If the project is genuinely important to national security, then say so, honestly. Do not disguise industrial policy as an ordinary private development. Make the case the American people are capable of understanding trade-offs if and when given the information. What they do not tolerate well is discovering that the trade-off was made for them, usually happening behind closed doors and back rooms. The choice is not approve anything big tech requests or surrender artificial intelligence to China. The choice is whether we build intelligently or stupidly, whether we build openly or secretly, whether we make the beneficiaries bear the largest share of the cost or spread those costs across people who never agreed to carry them in the first place, whether we treat communities as partners or, especially lately, obstacles, whether capitalism means competition and risk or simply using government to protect the most powerful corporations from both of those things. Artificial intelligence may be essential to beating China, but telling a senior citizen that their electric bill must rise so that one of the richest companies on earth can power a server farm is not a sustainable national strategy. Build the data centers, build the power plants, build the transmission lines, build the cooling systems, build the domestic chip plants, build the entire infrastructure required to win, but send the bills to the companies consuming the power, not automatically to every family already struggling to keep the lights on, because Francesca Hong does not need Wisconsin Republicans to become socialists. She only needs them to believe that the Republican Party cares more about big tech's next server farm than it does about their electric bill, their property, and their town. And when that happens, shouting socialism isn't going to be enough. You have to prove that your version of capitalism still works for people who do not own stock in the company receiving the subsidy. That is the challenge, not whether we build, but how we build. Who benefits, who decides, and who pays. We're going to close out this first hour and come back with a very different kind of story because South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has passed away while I was on my medical break. For more than 3 decades, Graham stood near the center of almost every major argument over war, immigration, the courts, Donald Trump even, and America's role in the world. He was a military lawyer, a House impeachment manager, a presidential candidate, John McCain's closest political ally, one of Donald Trump's fiercest critics, and later one of his most visible defenders. Conservatives respected him, distrusted him, defended him, mocked him, and frequently did all four, sometimes in the same week. But before any of that, he was a young man who lost both parents and took responsibility for his little sister. So when we return for hour 2, we're going to give Lindsey Graham's life and legacy the time it deserves. Not a canonization, not a roast, an honest look at the man, the career, the contradictions, and the Republican Party that he helped shape. That's ahead in hour 2. I'm Rick Robinson. This is the Rick Robinson Show. We will be back in just a few minutes, so stay tuned.
I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage, but the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start.
Oh, his name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST. The future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNRadio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNRadio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNRadio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNRadio.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, I think I found some of my confusion. Apparently, I have two labeled as main stage 3 with different visual settings. That explains why that explains a few things. Anyway, back to the intro.
In his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From DC to Tulsa, he's called.
Full disclosure, no real script, but lots of show notes. Otherwise, it's like, oh, look, squirrel. Anyway, it's also Chat Lives Matter Day, which means we got to do this one.
Uh-oh. Guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day, right here live on KLRNRadio.com. And this is hour 2 of the Rick Robinson Show. Don't forget, I'll be back tonight starting at 7 p.m. Eastern for an extended edition of Kingdom and Country. Got some makeup work to do because I've been missing a lot of work last couple of weeks in between funerals and feeling like crud. Anyway, so we're getting back into it right about now. So let's go.
It's the Rick Robinson Show, bold, unafraid. Truth bombs drop in a red state parade. From the plains to the power, he's speaking it loud with a mic and a mission.
So welcome back into hour 2 of the Rick Robinson Show. Again, I am none other than Rick Robinson himself. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham has passed away at the age of 71, and for a man who spent more than 3 decades in Washington, appeared on television almost constantly, inserted himself into nearly every major foreign policy argument of his era, and managed to irritate just about every faction of the Republican Party at one point or another, the temptation is going to be to reduce him to whichever version of him you like or dislike the most. The war hawk, the John McCain sidekick, the immigration deal maker, the Trump critic, eventually becoming a Trump defender, the Senate institutionalist, the Sunday show senator, the prosecutor, the partisan. All of those descriptions contain some truth. None of them, however, tell the entire story. So we're not going to canonize Lindsey Graham today. Couldn't do that even if I wanted to. We're not going to pretend every political decision he made was wise simply because he has passed away, but we are also not going to turn the death of a man into an excuse for one last cheap roast. As a matter of fact, before we get too far into this, I do have one of my favorite all-time clips of Lindsey Graham that somebody was kind enough to turn into a short. So I'm getting that queued up as we speak, so hang on.
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us. What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020. You've said that, not me. You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Lindsey said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. And if you really wanted to know the truth, you sure as hell wouldn't have done what you've done to this guy. If you wanted an FBI investigation.
All right, so that is probably one of my most memorable takeaways from Senator Lindsey Graham in the last decade or so, and he was completely spot on. And here's the thing: this is what has pissed off a lot of Republicans when it comes to things like the Supreme Court and appointments and everything else. Whenever, up until recently, the Democrats have been the ones in charge, the president usually gets 99% of the people that they ask for. Lindsey Graham even admitted, hey, I voted for Sotomayor. Next time you see her, tell her I said hello, because, yeah, we don't do what you guys do. And they really didn't up until recently. And now it started, but it's because they got tired of having to put up with this kind of treatment from the other side when look, let's face it. I've said this before. Like the Republicans hate the Republicans. I'm not actually technically one of them. I do vote with them quite often because they're the sanest option we currently have available. And to me, that's saying something, if I'm being completely honest with you. However, I will also say this. They've also tried to be the gentleman of politics. They've also treated themselves as if they were the little brother to their big brother, the Democratic Party, constantly and always seeming to seek approval and just wanting to get along and prove to people on that side that, hey, we're not the assholes that you keep telling the media that we are. Problem is that never took. And I've said this before, the schism really started during Reagan's final term when the Democrats said, take care, just clear the slate. Let's just declare all the people that were here illegally legal, and then we'll help you fix immigration. Reagan took them at their word. And then they said, just kidding. We're not doing that. That's where the schisms really started. If you go back and you can find it in documentaries and stuff, if you're nerdy enough to go look, this is when the two parties really, for the most part, stopped congregating with one another. They used to go to lunch together. They used to hang out together. They used to pass each other in the halls and have conversations. This is when the Republicans started having such hurt feelings that their leadership told them, no, we're not doing that anymore. But the problem is that during this whole time frame, there were still Republican congresscritters and Republican senators that were still chasing the approval of their Democratic friends. And this is sometimes the vein that Lindsey Graham has been shoved into. It's the brush that he's been painted with, because he was the one who really tried to reach across the aisle a lot. Him and McCain and Lieberman back in the day, now they probably are in heaven again, were once labeled, assuming they all went there, I'm not making a judgment, but assuming they all went there, they were once labeled the Three Amigos. I'm sure whether they're in a comfortable place or a very warm place, if they're together, they have probably been labeled the Three Amigos again. I'll let you guys decide which place you feel like they probably are wound up in, because I'm not going to have that argument. But, so again, we're not going to pretend every political decision he made was wise simply because he's passed away, but we're also not going to turn the death of a man into an excuse for one last cheap roast. Let's face it, I don't need an excuse for a cheap roast. We are going to talk honestly about who he was, what he believed, where he came from, why he mattered, why conservatives trusted him in some moments and distrusted him in others, and what his career tells us about the Republican Party that existed before Donald Trump and the party that emerged after him. Because Lindsey Graham did not merely serve through that transformation, he embodied it. Now, here's the part of the story that not everybody knew until his passing. Lindsey Olin Graham was born in Central South Carolina. His parents owned and operated a restaurant, bar, and a pool hall. Restaurant, bar, and pool hall. I guess it was all together. This was not a family of political privilege. It was not a family with generations of senators, judges, donors, or lobbyists preparing a path for him. Graham became the first member of his family to actually attend college. He attended the University of South Carolina, earned his undergraduate degree, and then went to law school. But the part of his personal story that matters most came before he had a political career, before the committee hearings, before the presidential campaign, before all the cameras were trained upon him. When Graham was 21, his mother died. 15 months later, his father died too, and Lindsey Graham suddenly found himself responsible for his younger sister, Darlene. He became her legal guardian and arranged for her to receive military dependent benefits by going so far as adopting her. That is one of those details that tells you something about a person that no campaign advertisement ever could. Before Lindsey Graham was responsible for legislation, military policy, judicial nominations, or South Carolina's place in the Senate, he was a young man who lost both parents and decided that his little sister was now his responsibility. Now, again, this puts it somewhere in the vein of between the ages. Let's see, he was 21 and then his father died 15 months later. So roughly 22 and some months old when his final parent died. I don't know about the life that you led when you were in your 20s. I don't know very many people that would not only take on the responsibility of their little sister, but also make sure that they became a legal guardian for them so that they could receive military benefits if something ever happened to him. So that to me speaks volumes about the man. And it's something that I wish I had known sooner, to be quite honest, because I didn't know any of that. Now, and this is coming from a guy who's a political junkie. I did not know any of that. And I kind of wish I did before he had passed, because it might have made me go a little bit easier on him. Maybe. So no committee vote explains character as clearly as what someone does when life gives him a duty he didn't ask for. Not only did he not ask for it, he stepped up in a way that so few of us actually would. Graham completed his education, began his legal career, and entered the Air Force as a judge advocate. That military service became one of the central organizing principles of his entire life. He served on active duty. He later continued in the South Carolina Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserve. His military career lasted more than 3 decades. He retired as a full-bird colonel. And unlike some politicians who use military service as a line in a biography and then rarely return to it, Graham carried the instincts of a military lawyer and national security hawk into almost every major policy debate of his career. He believed in alliances. He believed in American military power. He believed adversaries had to be confronted before they became stronger. He believed American withdrawal frequently created vacuums that hostile regimes would fill. His critics believed that worldview, too, often became a justification for commitments that repeatedly became larger, longer, and harder to leave. But whether you agreed with him or not, that belief system was not invented for a campaign. It is, in fact, who he was. Graham entered the South Carolina House of Representatives in the early 1990s, then came to the Republican Revolution in 1994. He was elected to the United States House and arrived in Washington as part of the generation that ended decades of Democratic control of the chamber. He did not remain an anonymous backbencher for long. During President Bill Clinton's impeachment, Graham served as one of the House managers presenting the case to the Senate. That role placed him at the center of one of the most divisive constitutional fights of the 1990s, and the Lindsey Graham style was already visible. He could be prosecutorial. He could be theatrical. He could be severe one moment and conversational the next. He enjoyed the argument, he was good on television, and he understood that Washington power was exercised partly in committee rooms and partly in front of a camera. In 2002, Graham won election to the Senate, succeeding Strom Thurmond. Think about that transition for a moment. Thurmond had served South Carolina for nearly half a century. Graham followed one of the longest-serving and most historically complicated figures in Senate history and went on to build a national identity that was almost impossible to separate from the modern Republican Party. He served on judiciary, armed services, and budget committees. He also held major roles involving appropriations and foreign policy. Those assignments placed him at the intersection of war, judges, money, diplomacy, and at the threshold of party power. And Lindsey Graham rarely encountered an intersection without trying to direct the traffic. For much of his Senate career, Graham was closely identified with John McCain and also Joe Lieberman, and they became known on the Hill as the Three Amigos. The phrase was sometimes affectionate, sometimes mocking, and usually both. McCain was the Republican war hero and presidential nominee. Lieberman was the Democratic vice presidential nominee who increasingly broke with his party on national security. Graham became the third member of that alliance, the South Carolina senator who shared their belief that American leadership abroad was not optional. They traveled together. They appeared together. They pushed for aggressive responses to hostile governments and terrorist groups, and they defended alliances. They argued that retreat would embolden America's enemies. That worldview dominated the Republican establishment for years. It shaped the response of September 11th. It shaped Iraq and Afghanistan. It shaped debates over Iran, Syria, Libya, Russia, NATO, Israel, and later even Ukraine. Lindsey Graham believed American strength prevented larger wars. His critics believed the same philosophy repeatedly produced commitments that became larger, longer, and harder to leave. That disagreement became one of the central dividing lines inside of the Republican Party itself. The old Republican establishment said American power must be visible, forward deployed, and willing to act. The emerging populist right said the establishment had spent American blood and money on endless commitments while communities at home declined. Graham never really abandoned that first view, even when the party changed around him, even when Donald Trump became its leader, even when Republican voters grew more skeptical of Ukraine and NATO. Along with NATO commitments and military intervention, Graham remained a hawk. He supported Israel with unusual consistency. He favored intense pressure on Iran. He argued for supporting Ukraine against Russia. He believed that failing to confront hostile governments early would make later confrontation more expensive and, dare we say, even more dangerous. One of his final overseas trips was, in fact, to Ukraine. Actually, his final overseas trip. That fact fits his career almost too perfectly. Lindsey Graham spent decades insisting that distant conflicts would eventually reach America if America failed to confront them. And he died while his own party was still arguing over whether that view represented hard-earned wisdom or the worldview of a Washington establishment that had learned nothing from Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, this is where I have to say, seeing everything that's played out with Iran and seeing the fact that now Donald Trump is doing more of that peace through strength kind of stuff, I have a feeling that came from Lindsey Graham. Now, remember, those two were diametrically opposed to one another in the beginning. But one of the things that I have seen that has come out from both sides is how they could be going to guns with Graham at one moment, and then he would turn it around and come back and help them with something else. And then that would make them realize that they don't necessarily always have to have an adversarial role. That is something that has come out over the last few days from everybody across party lines. How he could be pissed at you one minute and then help you get your passport the next, and you guys were best friends by the third day. Or you could be vice versa. You could be pissed at him, then he would help you with something. And that's the thing with Graham. He understood that none of this, and I think this is part of the problem that a lot of us have now, none of this was ever supposed to be personal, but we've made it that way. And the problem that we have, and this is on both sides, is we are now so anchored in our emotional responses to things that we stop thinking rationally about things. That's why a couple of weeks ago, about 30 days ago now, remember when I had that whole show planned that I was about to sit down and rationally explain why Donald Trump had to make a deal with Iran? And then he said, but maybe some ballistic missiles are okay for them, and I lost it. That's because I was trying to look at this from a logical perspective, trying to balance the fact that we can't fight wars the way that we used to because we built a system that intertwined everything to try to keep us from ever having a World War III. And because of that, we have fought with one hand one hand on the trigger and another on the scales ever since World War II, which is why if you look at everything historically, we have fought to a draw or a withdrawal in every conflict since. And we're facing the same problem with Iran. But again, Lindsey was Senator Graham, sorry, I don't want to call him Lindsey. I don't know him well enough to do that. But Senator Graham was one of those folks that for the longest time was saying this thing with Iran is eventually going to bite us in the ass. And he wasn't wrong. Again, the Iran conflict that we are facing today should have been dealt with on January 22nd, 1981. That is a hill that I am willing to die upon. And it is also the truth, because it would have been much easier to unseat and remove that fledgling theocracy before it was ever able to take legitimate hold of the country then, but we couldn't because we were too afraid that Russia and China would intervene. Now, I don't know which way is right. I don't know which way is wrong, but I do know that that is something that should have been addressed a long time ago. Now, we've talked about foreign policy a lot as we move on, but that wasn't the only reason conservatives had a complicated relationship with Graham. Immigration may have been the domestic issue that most consistently separated him from the Republican base, both in the war hawk years and the Trump era. Graham participated in bipartisan immigration negotiations. He supported legal status and protections for some people brought into the country illegally as children. He repeatedly worked with Democrats on comprehensive reform efforts. To his defenders, this demonstrated seriousness. Immigration was a difficult national problem, and Graham was willing to negotiate rather than simply deliver speeches. To many conservatives and voters alike, it demonstrated something else. They heard the same pattern repeatedly. Legalization now, enforcement later. Promises of border security, but only as future action. Promises that the next compromise would finally solve the problem. And then the enforcement never actually arrived. Graham became one of the clearest symbols of the Republican establishment's belief that a bipartisan deal was inherently more responsible than continued confrontation. The base increasingly believed those deals gave Democrats what they wanted immediately because they had seen the proof in earlier years, while giving Republicans promises that could be ignored later. That distrust did not emerge from the middle of nowhere. It helps explain even why Donald Trump's immigration message destroyed so much of the old Republican consensus. Trump did not begin with the idea of compromise. He began with enforcement. He did not apologize for using words like border, wall, deportation, sovereignty, and citizenship. He told Republican voters that their leaders had negotiated away the issue for decades. Lindsey Graham was one of the leaders those voters had in mind. Graham also ran for president in 2015. His campaign was built heavily around national security. He warned about terrorism. He warned about hostile regimes. He warned that the United States was retreating from the world. He brought experience, knowledge, and decades of service, and almost nobody voted for him. His candidacy never developed serious momentum. He withdrew before the voting began, even. That failure matters because it showed how far the Republican electorate had already moved away from the kind of candidate Washington considered prepared. Graham looked like a great candidate if you looked at his resume. Trump looked like an insurgent. He still kind of is. Graham spoke the language of alliances, briefings, committees, and military commitments. Trump spoke the language of borders, deals, strength, humiliation, and winning. Graham initially opposed him in intensely personal terms. During the 26 campaign, he called Trump unfit to serve. He warned that nominating him would destroy the Republican Party. He may have actually been somewhat right on that point, because the Republican Party of today looks nothing like the Republican Party of the day that he was sworn in. He attacked Trump's character. He rejected Trump's foreign policy instincts. He treated Trump as a dangerous embarrassment. But then Trump won. And then, much like me, Lindsey Graham changed. Because remember, I was never Trump until the day that he was sworn in. I was never Trump because he said things during the debates that absolutely terrified me. Like because he was commander-in-chief, if he ordered the military in conflicts to go start kicking in doors, they would do what he told them to do because he was commander-in-chief. And all I heard was the first Mojo Jojo impersonation I've ever heard on a campaign stage. The U.S. military will do these things that I have told them to do because I'm commander-in-chief. Mwahaha. And that was one of the first things that actually made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Not even going to try to lie about it. You guys, for those of you that have been listening to me for a while, you know all of this. You knew why I was diametrically opposed to Donald Trump becoming president in 2016 and being sworn in 2017. You know this. Doesn't change anything. But what happened is the same thing that happened with a lot of my crew, who was also never Trump at the time. Once he's president, it's kind of retarded to root for him to lose, because then everybody loses. It's the same reason why I did my best to try to get behind the cauliflower in chief during his 4-year term. It was impossible to do, but I still tried, because I can't root for the country to fail. The problem that we have now is we have Democrats who have largely become communists, who not only want the country to fail, they needed to fail. And one of the funniest things for me, after taking a break for about a week or so, because of funerals and feeling like crap and stress and everything else, was starting to come back to the news cycle and realizing that the folks that make all the big money for doing this crap were talking about stuff that I was talking about a month ago. I'm like, I might as well just start taking time off more often. It takes them a month to catch up to me. Because, yeah, they're talking about the DSA campaign planks. I talked about those like 3 weeks ago. How they want to fundamentally change America. Remember Obama's favorite phrase? Fundamentally transform America? Yeah, they want to do it. They want to get rid of the Senate altogether. They want a unicameral legislation, one elected by the people. They want to either do away with or severely curtail the Supreme Court. These are the things that folks like Francesca Hong, who I talked about earlier in the program, they're making inroads with people because they are taking on the whole, AI data center stuff. And everybody's just looking at that and not looking at the rest of what these people actually stand for. And that happened to me with Trump. I'm not even going to pretend it didn't. But then I started watching him govern. Remember, at the time I was working for the state. I worked for the University of Oklahoma on loan to the Department of Human Services through their Center for Public Management contract. Now, you ever want to sit down and have a long discussion about how incestuous most relationships are between state schools and state government? I'm your guy, because it's bad. However, I started there in 2015. Or I'm sorry, 2013. I don't know why I keep saying 2015. It was October of 2013, because I retired in October of 2023 at my 10-year mark. However, from 2023 until 2017, from 2023 until 2013 to 2017, I had one raise. And every time it was time for them to decide whether our contract was going to get a raise or not, they started screaming and yelling and hemming and hawing about public monies being available, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Guess what? For the entire first term that Trump was in office, after not getting a raise since the beginning of 2014, I got 3 raises in 2 years. Because Trump fixed the economy in a lot of ways. And I think that is why, and then after this, we're going to have to take a break. I think this is why Lindsey Graham went from a severe Trump critic to a Trump ally, because Graham gradually moved from being one of Trump's fierce Republican critics to one of his most visible and loudest allies. They golfed together. They spoke frequently. Graham defended Trump on television as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He played a major role in confirmation battles and investigations that mattered deeply to the Trump administration. Pardon me. He became one of the loudest defenders of Trump during partisanship fights involving the Justice Department, impeachment, the courts, and the media. For some conservative, Graham's evolution was proof that he finally understood the movement. He accepted that Republican voters had chosen Trump and used his Senate experience to advance judges, defend the administration, and fight Democrats whenever possible. For others, it was political survival. They remembered how harshly he had condemned Trump, watched him become one of Trump's most reliable television defenders, and concluded that Washington loyalty often followed whoever controlled the party. The truth is probably more complicated. Graham was adaptable. He was also ambitious, and he understood how power worked. And he also appeared to develop a genuine personal relationship with Trump. Whether you call it adaptation, reconciliation, conversion, or political survival, Lindsey Graham understood before many of his colleagues did that Donald Trump was no longer a temporary disruptor. He was the center of the Republican Party. Graham chose to work with that reality rather than become another former senator explaining on cable television why Republican voters had hurt his feels. But even after becoming a Trump ally, Graham did not become a Trump clone. He continued to disagree with Trump over Russia, Ukraine, NATO, military intervention, withdrawal, and the broader question of how aggressively American power should be used abroad. Graham adjusted to the Trump era. He did not surrender his entire worldview to it. Graham's time leading the Judiciary Committee gave him another defining role. He became a central Republican figure in judicial confirmation battles, and we played a clip of that earlier. He strongly defended Trump's nominees. He attacked what Republicans saw as the destruction of fair process during Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. He confronted Democrats over accusations, evidentiary standards, and the weaponization of personal allegations. That period may have been one of the moments where conservative voters trusted Graham most, because he was angry, but he was also direct. He seemed genuinely offended by what he believed Democrats were doing to the confirmation process. His performance during those hearings reminded conservatives why he could be such an effective partisan fighter when he chose to be. But even there, the contradiction remained. Graham was an institutionalist who frequently accused the institutions around him of behaving dishonorably. He respected norms until he believed the other side was exploiting them. He was willing to negotiate, but also capable of scorching partisan rhetoric. He wanted the Senate to be the Senate. He also understood that the Senate of courteous disagreement was quickly disappearing. Lindsey Graham was not simply caught between two political eras. He helped bridge them. Conservatives will remember the military service, Israel, the judges, Kavanaugh, and the moments when Graham was willing to fight. They will also remember immigration deals, interventionism, Sunday television hits, and the extraordinary turn from Trump antagonist to Trump ally. They will argue over which Lindsey Graham was the real Lindsey Graham. Well, the real Lindsey Graham, please stand up. Oh, sorry. The answer is that all of them were in fact real. He was a military hawk, an institutionalist, a deal maker, a partisan combatant, a television politician, a loyal friend, a political survivor, and sometimes he managed to be all of those things before lunch. That complexity is why he mattered. That is also why almost nobody had a simple relationship with him. The populist right never fully trusted him. The anti-Trump right never forgave his alliance with Trump. Democrats appreciated him when he negotiated with them and condemned him when he fought with them. Trump supporters cheered him when he defended the president and attacked him when he backed Ukraine or immigration compromise. He lived at the center of a party being torn between its past and its future, and he never entirely belonged to either side. Lindsey Graham's death creates immediate political consequences. It affects South Carolina. It affects Senate committee leadership. It creates a budget committee leadership vacancy at the exact moment Republicans are trying to move another reconciliation package. It affects foreign policy debates, particularly over Ukraine, Russia, Israel, and Iran. It removes one of the Senate's most recognizable voices. But those consequences are going to have to wait till after the break. Before all the titles and arguments, he was the young man who lost both parents and took responsibility for his sister. That part of his life deserves to sit for a moment. Politics will spend the next several days deciding whether Lindsey Graham was a statesman, a warmonger, a survivor, a sellout, a loyal friend, or a relic of the establishment era. The truth is that pieces of every description will actually fit, but no one can seriously argue that he was a spectator. For more than 3 decades, Lindsey Graham ran toward the argument and usually found a television camera waiting when he got there. When we come back, we will move from the man to the immediate political consequences of his passing. Republicans are trying to open a reconciliation path for provisions of the Save America Act, even if they don't think they can get the whole thing passed. His passing creates a budget committee leadership vacancy at the exact moment that effort is trying to move forward. And the Senate's budget rules may decide how much of the election security agenda can survive. But we'll get to that after the break. I'm Rick Robinson. This is The Rick Robinson Show. Don't go too far. We'll be right back.
I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage, but the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice, till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hey,
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener
Oopsie. A little fast on the buttons. Welcome back. Welcome back. BZ, you and I don't disagree often, but I think this is exactly the time that Graham deserves something like this because he didn't ever really change, which is kind of what we keep saying we want from our politicians. But anyway. All right, so we're going to keep going here. We may actually get into a bit of overtime because I clocked this before the show and it said it was probably going to run over. I've tried to cut out some of the extra clips and other things that I wanted to play because I wasn't sure my voice would hold out, but we may still get a few minutes extra in here. And yes, after hearing the story about what he did for his sister, who I see a lot of leftists having their heads melt over being her appointed as a temporary senator. I guess they don't really understand how this stuff works. Because again, before the 17th Amendment, the states used to pick the senators. Anyway, in the event of a senator's passing and their term has not been ended through election, then the governor gets to pick a replacement, usually a temporary replacement until they hold a special election, which is exactly what happened with Lindsey Graham's sister. Anyway, so welcome back. Before the break, we spent some time with the life and legacy of Senator Lindsey Graham, not just the senator, not just the war hawk. And again, I'm going to say this again. There were plenty of times that I disagreed with Lindsey Graham on policy. Not going to pretend there weren't. There were times that I did entire segments excoriating the man because I didn't think he was right on something. But I'm also willing to admit that he was probably the last of a no longer inexistent generation of statesmen. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party evolved well past the point of being able to deal with those type of people and started trying to take advantage of them instead. And again, that started under Reagan. So this isn't anything new. It's just much worse than it is now. But the problem that we have now is now that he's gone, there are some immediate political consequences surrounding his passing, because Lindsey Graham's death created a leadership vacancy on the Senate Budget Committee at the exact moment House Republicans are trying to launch their third reconciliation package under President Trump. And this time, the priorities are election security, homeland security, and national defense. That means even if they can't get the entire thing through, they are still trying to get some of the important provisions of the Save America Act in this thing, and they may finally get their best chance to move through the Senate. Not the whole bill, and not automatically, and not without a major procedural fight, but this does mean a chance. House Republican leaders have begun the budget process required to unlock another reconciliation bill. The stated goals are narrow: safeguard American elections, strengthen national defense, protect the homeland, and enact as much of the Save America agenda as Senate rules will allow. The last part matters because reconciliation is not a magic wand. It is a special budget process that allows legislation to pass the Senate with a simple majority instead of the 60 votes usually required to overcome the now magical and snooze button version of a filibuster. That is why Republicans are using it. They have already passed versions of election security legislation through the House. Under ordinary Senate rules, Democrats can usually prevent the bill from reaching a final vote unless Republicans attract enough support to clear the 60-vote threshold. Reconciliation gives Republicans a possible way around that particular obstacle, but only if the provisions qualify as budgetary. And that is where the Byrd rule, snark included, enters the story. The Byrd rule prevents Congress from stuffing a reconciliation bill with policy provisions whose budget effects are merely incidental. In plain English, you cannot take an ordinary policy mandate, tape a $5 appropriation to the side of it, and call the whole thing a budget bill. The provision must meaningfully affect federal spending or revenue. That means the full Save America Act agenda may not survive. The White House wants proof of citizenship for federal voter registration, voter identification, stronger voter roll maintenance, tighter mail-in voting rules, more reliable verification. But the Senate parliamentarian, who's apparently banging the Senate leader, wait, did I say that? Oh, my bad. May determine that some of those are primarily election regulations rather than budget provisions. If that happens, They could be stripped from the reconciliation package unless Republicans are prepared to challenge the ruling. So what has the better chance? Funding. Federal grants to help states verify citizenship. Money to connect election officials with citizenship databases. Upgrades to federal registration systems. Funding for audits. Resources for voter roll maintenance. Assistance for citizens who lack easy access to documentation. Republicans may also try to attach conditions to federal election administration funding. Those provisions have a more obvious connection to the federal budget. A direct national proof of citizenship mandate is going to be harder. A sweeping federal voter ID rule may be even harder than that. Broader restrictions on mail voting, not going to fit either. That doesn't mean Republicans shouldn't try. It means the public needs to understand that this is the beginning of the fight, not the signing ceremony. The budget resolution opens the door. The committee writes the detailed bill, and the parliamentarian tests the provisions. The House and Senate negotiate, and then the president may get something to sign, or it may not, because the entire effort may collapse under the weight of Senate rules and Republican disagreements. That is how Congress works, slowly, awkwardly, and usually while pretending the final result is obvious from the first press release. The basic Republican argument is rather straightforward. Federal elections belong legally to American citizens. If the federal government is sending states hundreds of millions of dollars to administer those elections, Congress has a legitimate interest in making sure the systems can verify the eligibility of voters. That does not require claiming millions of non-citizens are voting. We should not make claims we can't prove, and it's not necessary. The fact that we're seeing handfuls of cases where we know this is happening should be enough. We don't need a definite number, because these things, much like when you have insects in your home, if you see one, there's usually a lot more that you can't see. And we're seeing that with the fraud iceberg that is now being visible in our news cycles, because now that they're starting to look for fraud, they can't turn over a rock without finding more of it. But they don't want to look at this part, because up until now, both parties have wanted illegal immigration and illegal voting for different reasons. So the point of the safeguard here is not that fraud must already be overwhelming. The point of a safeguard is to make sure the public can trust that fraud remains rare. And I would go a step further and say that hopefully we can one day get to the point where we know fraud isn't happening at all. Banks do not wait for every account to be drained before requiring identification. Airports do not eliminate security because most passengers are not terrorists. We use safeguards because public confidence depends on knowing that the rules are real. And elections determine everything else we have discussed today. Things like immigration, taxes, housing, schools, energy, judges, policing, war. If elections decide who controls those powers, then the ballot box cannot be treated as an afterthought. But there is a second obligation. A proof of citizenship system cannot be designed so carelessly that eligible citizens are effectively locked out because they lack a passport, cannot locate a birth certificate, change their name after marriage, or were born in a country where the records are difficult to retrieve. And why do I have all of that in there? Because those are the arguments the left is making even still today, and none of them hold water. None of them. Marriage is not going to impact you because you don't ever have to change the name on your birth certificate, whether you're married or not. You provide proof of your marriage license along with your birth certificate. And don't tell me you can't find them, because if you can't find them, guess what? You go to the county where your birth certificate is on file, and they will give you a certified copy of it, usually for a nominal fee. Same thing with your marriage license or divorce decrees or anything else that supports whatever your name was changed from to what it is now changed to. But the left, the same people who want you to believe that their side is the party of the educated, the folks who understand how everything works, the folks who most understand how the economy works, also want you to believe that the lion's share of their voters are too incompetent to be able to provide proof of citizenship if required. Election security and voter access are not actually opposites, but we also have to look at what the left is using as supposed issues with voter access. Because the idea that you have to have an ID when you have to have one for pretty much everything else on the planet is somehow voter disenfranchisement is nothing but a stupid argument, but the left keeps running with it anyway. So here's the thing. What we need to do is twofold. We need to be able to prove two things at once: that only eligible citizens can actually vote in elections that are only eligible for actual citizens, and that every eligible citizen can vote should they choose to. That should be the standard. And it's not that hard, especially if you take away the left's asinine arguments. So now we move on to the next part of this, because that question of public trust carries directly into our next story. Because while Congress is debating how to protect election systems, two Supreme Court justices went to Capitol Hill to talk about protecting the people who interpret the Constitution. Amy Coney Barrett and Elena Kagan appeared before congressional appropriators to request additional security funding for physical security, residential security, protective staffing, increases in cybersecurity protections. And for Amy Coney Barrett, the argument was not abstract, it was personal. And we have some of that clip as soon as I can find it. Hang on. There we go. Like, I know I have it here somewhere. Oh, hang on. Oops, if I hit the right buttons in the right order. Did I mention I am my own producer? So occasionally if things go sideways, it is entirely my fault. But if I were to worry about things like that, there probably wouldn't be shows. So we just do what we can do. All right, here we go.
So I thought I would just share a little bit about how the threats have affected me and my family personally. They have required me to, my children, to think about and see things that children should not have to see or think about. One example is when threats to my life were particularly intense a few years ago, around the time of the Dobbs leak. My security detail sent me home with a bulletproof vest, and I carried it into my house, put it into my bedroom, dropped it down on a table, turned around, and my 12-year-old son was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, and he wanted to know what it was and why I had it, and I didn't know how to respond, because maybe I lack imagination, but I didn't expect that performing this service was going to put me in the position of explaining to my children what a bulletproof vest was and why I had to wear one. It's also been reported in the news that roughly 6 weeks ago, I was the victim of a swatting incident. At that point, my teenage son, one of my teenage sons, opened the door to go out with friends and saw in our street, it was full of police cars, who had responded to a false report of gunshots and raised voices in my home. I was very, very grateful that I had Supreme Court police outside my home, because they were able to stop and meet with and explain to the county police that it had been a false alarm, and so the police did not actually attempt to enter our home. Many of us, me included, have received threatening anonymous deliveries designed to intimidate and harass us. They are often sent in the name of Judge Salas's son, who I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, Mr. Chairman, is deceased because he was killed by a disgruntled lawyer who showed up at Judge Salas's home intending to kill her, but her son, 20 years old at the time, opened the door and took the bullet instead. Her husband, standing behind, was seriously injured. So I think the message on these deliveries being sent in his name is clear. As Justice Kagan said, federal judges across the country, throughout the judiciary, including the Supreme Court, continue to do their jobs without fear or favor, but the threat level is really high.
So you see, I have a problem with her last comment that judges, including SCOTUS judges, continue to do their jobs without fear or favor. You just explained exactly why you are doing things out of fear, whether you want to admit it to the people that you're testifying in front of or not. Look, I said this yesterday. Not everybody is trained to run towards danger. Not everybody has it in them. But if you are having issues with explaining to your 12-year-old son, who last I checked was probably a video gamer, who didn't have any idea what a bulletproof vest was, I don't know, am I the only one who finds that a little hard to believe? I mean, seriously, he's never watched a single TV show where people have a bulletproof vest on. I mean, more an understanding question for me would have been, especially for a 12-year-old. Hey, Mom, why do you have a bulletproof vest? All of a sudden, what happened? That I could have understood, but this whole, what is that and why do you even have it? I don't know. That feels like one of those things that didn't really happen moments to me. But I'm cynical, so what can I say? BZ's agreeing with me. He just put in the chat, I call bullshit. And look, here's my thing with all of this. Once you admit that you're afraid, you should quit. Now, this is coming from somebody who has done all kinds of careers, all kinds of different things, a lot of which involved running towards danger, running towards gunfire, kicking in doors, training people to do the same, training people to do other jobs. The moment you show weakness at all, you should quit. Because once they can see that you're afraid, they're just going to keep coming after you. And the one thing that you cannot say, if you look at that clip, hang on, let me get back down there. If you look at that clip, the one thing you cannot say, let me back it up for just a little bit, is there is not visible proof that she's afraid. Look at that face. Look at the wide eyes. This woman was terrified. I'm not saying she doesn't have a right to be terrified. What I am saying is you cannot say that you're doing your job without fear or favor when your face has fear painted all over it. And you have now shown the same people that have been trying to intimidate you that their intimidation is working, which unfortunately calls into question every ruling that you've made recently. Have you been making those rulings because you have been trying to make sure that nobody hurts you or your family? And if that is the case, I'm not necessarily saying that you're wrong for doing so. But I'm saying if you can't do your job anymore without that fear sitting in the back of your mind, you probably shouldn't be doing the job anymore at all. Exactly. And that's the thing. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you admit you're afraid, and this is coming from people like me and BZ who spent time on the streets and time in the field. Once you admit even to yourself that you're scared to go into the field, you should leave, because all you're going to do is eventually get yourself hurt or somebody else. Doesn't even matter if you have to admit it out loud. If you are doing a job where you are required to feel 10 feet tall and bulletproof and you can't do those things, then you don't need to be doing it. That's just the truth of it. And it's a hard thing to explain to people who haven't run towards danger or run towards bullets. Because I'll be honest with you, the one thing I never really have been able to come to terms with is firefighters. I can run towards gunshots all day long. And there have been a couple of times in my career that I've had to go into burning buildings with all the equipment and everything else. And yes, I even got a rip over it. Back when I was working for another company, they said, don't you ever fucking do that again. You're on a 3-day suspension. You don't ever go into a burning a building without the proper equipment. And I'm like, but there was somebody screaming and fire was still 3 minutes out. What the hell was I supposed to do? Because I went in and dragged somebody out before they lost consciousness. That's why I was saying earlier, this whole thing of, don't put yourself in front of vehicles. You can't do that all of the time, because there's usually a logical reason in the moment while somebody has put themselves between a vehicle and their ingress and egress points. And it's usually to protect the crowd. So the idea of all these policies and procedures that say you're never supposed to put yourself in front of a vehicle, that's bullshit. Because, look, even as a security officer, I took an oath. It wasn't the same one, but I still took another oath. And I lived by it. I still do. That's why I do this. Once a sheepdog, always a sheepdog. How you stay one may change depending on how old you get, how broken you get, and the fact that you don't really want to go out and chase bad guys anymore. But once a sheepdog, always a sheepdog. Anyway. All right, so let's get back into the actual notes so I can finish up today, because otherwise I'm going to be long. So again, we heard already Barrett told lawmakers about having to wear a bulletproof vest. and about having to explain the vest to her child, which again, I think is a little weird for a 12-year-old boy. I could almost even understand it if it was like a 12-year-old girl, maybe, but a 12-year-old boy. Look, I'm not trying to diminish that point, because again, the fact that our Supreme Court justices are having to wear bulletproof vests, the fact that we've gone from the Chief Justice to all of the justices having full-time police details, wonder why that happened. Let's talk about that for a second. Why is this happening? Why are there all these threats? And who started it? You know who I think should have to pay for all these security changes? Chucky Schumer. That's who. Anybody remember his reap the whirlwind comments from back in the day? Because I do. But let's think about this from a logical perspective, from people that aren't trained to run towards danger every day. So you can disagree with every opinion ACB has ever written, and I have disagreed with quite a few of them. You can believe her entire judicial philosophy is wrong, and I think about at least 50% of it is. You can believe her confirmation was rushed. You can believe the Supreme Court has too much power. You can believe the court needs stronger ethics rules, more transparency, or tighter limits on emergency orders. But her child should not have to learn about her mom having to use body armor because his mother served on the Supreme Court. That shouldn't have to be a partisan statement. It should be an American one. Barrett and Kagan came from different ideological wings of the court. They disagree on law. They disagree on constitutional interpretation. They disagree on cases that affect abortion, guns, religious liberty, executive power, elections, and the reach of federal agencies. But they do not disagree that judges should be able to decide cases without wondering whether someone is waiting outside their homes. The court is seeking additional money for protective officers, residential security, cybersecurity updates, cybersecurity personnel, and other safeguards. And the request comes against a backdrop that is increasingly difficult to dismiss. There was an assassination plot targeting Justice Brett Kavanaugh. There have been swatting incidents, threatening communications, demonstrations outside private homes, threats against lower court judges and their families. Then there's the digital side of things. The court says its systems face enormous volumes of attempted intrusion, probing, and cyber attack. That does not mean hundreds of millions of successful breaches. It means hostile actors are consistently and constantly testing the walls. And the Supreme Court has already learned how much damage one internal breach can do. The leaked Dobbs draft did not merely reveal an opinion early. It changed the political environment surrounding the court. I got to stop here for a second, because it kind of seems to me that at some point there was some sort of a CYA memo released that the Dobbs decision was released through a firewall breach. I don't buy that. But the draft being leaked early changed the political environment surrounding the entire court. It triggered protest. It intensified pressure. It damaged trust inside the institution, and it demonstrated that information security is not a side issue. It is part of judicial independence. Elena Kagan raised the role of political rhetoric, and she's right to do it, but she didn't really take credit for her side of the problem. No political party gets to claim clean hands here. The left spent years describing conservative justices as illegitimate political operatives. Not wrong, not misguided, but illegitimate. The right has its own version of the same disease. A judge rules against Trump, and suddenly he's a traitor. Problem is, most of the time, the argument can, in fact, be made, though, for that one. Maybe that's just my own bent coming through, but one of the biggest ones recently was the birthright citizenship stuff. Everybody who understands history knows what the 14th Amendment was supposed to be about. But now it's leading to birth tourism and continuing birth tourism. So every legal disagreement becomes evidence of a conspiracy, but then everyone acts surprised when unstable people decide judges are combatants. Criticism isn't the problem. The Supreme Court has enormous power. Its decisions deserve fears criticism. Judges are not elected royally. Challenging rulings through appeals, legislation, elections, constitutional amendments, and public arguments should be a thing. Threats, swatting, doxing, and intimidation are not democratic participation. They are coercion. And here's the other thing. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I haven't been able to find any confirmed reports of anybody on my side of the argument doing these things to the judges, even if we are calling them names online sometimes. Once judges begin calculating whether a decision will place their families in danger, judicial independence stops being an abstract constitutional principle. It becomes a security question. Security is not a reward for public approval. You can demand tougher ethics rules and still fund protection. You can demand greater transparency and still protect their homes. You can believe the court has made terrible decisions and still recognize that a robe is not body armor. So this brings us to one of the last things we're going to be talking about today, as we have officially moved well into overtime. This is going to bring us to Jack Smith, because the next story is also about power, constitutional safeguards, and what happens when the people exercising government authority decide that the guardrails aren't there for your protection, but they're in fact obstacles to what they want to do. Chuck Grassley says Jack Smith's investigation of Donald Trump became a runaway train with no brakes. And according to newly released Justice Department records, one of the brakes was a filter team designed to protect privileged material. Smith's investigators apparently drove around it. The new disclosure involved text messages, content connected to 44 current and former members of Congress, 40 Republicans, 4 Democrats. The messages were reportedly found on government devices used by Trump White House officials and later provided by the National Archives. The list included Chuck Grassley, Lindsey Graham, Josh Hawley, Rand Paul, Tom Cotton, Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan, Thomas Massie, Cory Booker, Karen Bass, and others. That bipartisan detail matters because this cannot become a constitutional principle that applies only when Republicans are the victims. If a Democratic Justice Department can read Republican lawmakers' messages without proper safeguards, a Republican Justice Department can do the same thing to Democrats later. And in this case, Democratic communications were apparently swept in too. The problem is not merely that investigators encountered communications involving members of Congress. That can happen during a legitimate investigation. The problem is the process used after the records arrived. The special counsel's office had established a filter team. The filter team existed to identify material that might be privileged or constitutionally protected before the investigative team received and reviewed it. The Justice Department's own disclosure indicates that Smith's team accessed the material before the filter process had done its job. That's the biggest part of the scandal. They created a safeguard. They then went around the safeguard. The filter team was supposed to be one of the brakes. The investigators apparently decided they didn't need the brakes. The Constitution's speech or debate clause protects members of Congress from executive or judicial interference with legitimate legislative acts. That does not mean every text message sent by a senator is automatically untouchable. A campaign message may not be protected. A press strategy may not be protected either. A political conversation might not be protected. A personal message most likely isn't going to be protected. The protection depends on the substance of the communication, but that is precisely why the filter process mattered. The people investigating Trump should not have been the first and only people deciding whether communications with Congress were protected from the Trump investigation. An independent review was supposed to happen first. If the message was not privileged, pass it to the investigators. If it was protected legislative activity, then they should have kept it out. That system protects Congress from executive intrusion. It protects prosecutors from contaminating their case. And it protects the public from having to trust that investigators exercise perfect restraint while reading material they were not actually supposed to see. So this is where the rubber starts meeting the road. Did Jack Smith lie? I'm going to say yes. Some of my notes are going to disagree, but I'm going to say yes, because I do remember him specifically being asked, did any of this information that you received involve any text messages? And he said no. Jack Smith testified under oath that records requested from members of Congress did not include the content of text messages. The new records show that his team, in fact, reviewed text message content involving members of Congress. That sounds like a contradiction. to me, and it looks like legally it may actually become one, but the exact wording matters. Smith appears to have been answering a narrow question about toll records obtained directly from lawmakers, phone numbers, dates, times, duration, metadata. The newly disclosed message content apparently came from the White House devices held by the National Archives, not from subpoenas served directly on the lawmakers. That is going to give Smith a defense. He may say the records we requested for members of Congress didn't actually include that content, so I answered the question correctly. The content came from another lawful source. Technically, my answer was true, and technically may be enough to defeat a criminal perjury charge. Because unfortunately, perjury is difficult to prove, unless you're a Republican. The statement must be knowingly false. The question must be clear. The answer cannot merely be evasive, incomplete, or lawyerly. But technical truth is not the same thing as candor. Congress now needs to determine whether Smith gave an accurate answer, a material misleading answer, or a knowingly false answer. Did he know his team had reviewed congressional message content? Did he understand the question to reach that material? Who authorized bypassing his filter team? Was Smith personally aware of that bypass? How were the messages used? Were protected legislative communications shared with prosecutors? Did the material influence charging decisions? You probably already know the answer to that one. Those are the questions for a real hearing. Grassley says he intends to bring Smith before the Senate Judiciary Committee, to which I say good, put him under oath again, show him the records, ask the questions clearly, give him the opportunity to explain, then determine whether this was negligence, recklessness, constitutional overreach, contempt, or something criminal. We do not need to declare Jack Smith guilty of perjury before the hearing in order to recognize the severity of what has already been disclosed. Maybe Smith's deposition answer was, in fact, technically true. This is why Shakespeare once said, kill all the lawyers. Maybe it was a lawyerly misdirection. Stipulating back to my last statement. Maybe the bypass was reckless rather than criminal, but public trust does not survive on technicalities when prosecutors are reading communications involving members of Congress before the constitutional guardrails have been applied. That brings us home to Oklahoma. Now, there are a couple of stories, and again, we're in overtime, so I'm going to keep going with these. One of these is irritating even to me. Our final two stories are local, but they involve the same recurring theme. People follow the rules, they pay the rent, they obtain the license, they trust the system, and then they discover the system may not protect them from the people exploiting it. Cassandra Rhodes came home to her apartment at Drexel Flats in Oklahoma City and found another notice from the city. The water could be shut off again. She reportedly kept the previous notices from December, February, April, and now July. The tenants had paid their rent. The landlord had not kept the building's water account current. That sentence contains the entire injustice. The tenants paid the landlord allegedly failed to pay the city, and the people who fulfilled their obligation were the ones being threatened with losing an essential service. The problem extends beyond one Oklahoma City property as well. Vesta Realty, the company in question, owns or has owned apartment properties across all of Oklahoma. In Tulsa, tenants at several complexes discovered their dumpsters were gone. Trash began piling up. Vesta's attorney said the waste management company had abruptly ended service. In Stillwater, officials declared a Vesta complex a public nuisance after residents reportedly went for months without reliable heat and water. In Jenks, Oklahoma, 2 Vesta properties were declared nuisances over accumulating trash again. Tulsa reporting found 9 Vesta properties accounted for more than half of the city's unpaid multi-tenant water debt at one point. At individual complexes, the delinquent balances reach tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are also foreclosure proceedings involving multiple Vesta-connected properties and civil lawsuits containing allegations of financial mismanagement and personal enrichment. Those are civil allegations. They have not been proven as criminal facts yet. But the nuisance declarations, delinquent utility accounts, foreclosure filings, and repeated tenant complaints are not imaginary situations. And the people trapped in the middle are not the executives, lenders, lawyers, or even the investors. They're the tenants themselves who did the right thing, paid all their bills, and are still facing not having access to basic services. Oklahoma law gives tenants some rights when a landlord fails to provide an essential service. But according to legal aid, the most practical remedy in a utility shutoff case may be to terminate the lease and to move. But think about how useless that can be. The law says you may leave. The tenant says, with what money? Because where am I going to find first month's rent? Sometimes even last month's rent, along with a security deposit. Let's not forget the non-refundable application fees, the cost to move itself, the new utility deposits when I'm already having issues with my current utilities, transportation, and then the most difficult question, where exactly am I supposed to go? For a low-income tenant, the legal right to break the lease may be a right to become homeless and go live under a bridge. A remedy is not meaningful if the person entitled to use it cannot afford to exercise it. That is the policy failure. The tenant has every obligation, pay on time, follow the lease, maintain the unit, do not damage the property. But when the landlord fails to keep the water on, remove the trash, provide heat, or maintain basic habitability, the enforcement burden falls on the person with the least money and the least power. Property rights should matter. Contract rights matter. Landlords are, in fact, entitled to collect rent. They are entitled to remove tenants who refuse to pay or destroy their property. But a contract cannot mean only one side has enforceable duties. The tenant pays the landlord does not pay the utility, the city threatens the tenant's water. Then Oklahoma law tells the tenant, the solution is to spend money they do not have, moving out of the home they already paid for. That is not a functioning remedy. That is government documenting the failure and handing the victim a cardboard box. Oklahoma lawmakers should look at stronger emergency protections, allowing tenants to pay essential utilities directly and credit the payment against rent when a landlord defaults. Receivership for large properties where essential services repeatedly fail, emergency relocation or escrow mechanisms, not because every landlord is a villain, most aren't. Not because every tenant complaint is automatically correct, because they're not. Because when a large apartment operator repeatedly fails to provide water, heat, or basic sanitation, the state needs a remedy that protects the residents without forcing them onto the streets. The tenant pays on time, the landlord does not pay the city, then the tenant loses water. There's no conservative principle that requires pretending that should be considered acceptable. Now, here's another one. And if you've been listening here in Oklahoma, we had a gubernatorial candidate who didn't make it past the primary process, who wanted to put a moratorium on things like marijuana licensing. Well, Gettner Drummond, who is still our attorney general and is also still trying to be governor, I think. I need to pay attention because I know there's a runoff happening here soon, and I haven't really been paying that much attention because I've been sick. But our next Oklahoma story begins with marijuana enforcement and ends somewhere much darker. Attorney General Gettner Drummond's organized crime task force raided businesses in Bristow and Tulsa after reports and inspections uncovered suspected illegal activity. Now, I do want to point something out. Gettner Drummond, I keep having News 9 flashbacks from back in the day. Get Val on the Gettner. I don't know if there's a tie there or not, but I guess maybe he was conceived during a thunderstorm. Hell, I don't know. Anyway, sorry. I'll shut up now. Or at least move back to the topic. So they raided businesses in Bristow and Tulsa after reports and inspections uncovered suspected illegal activity. In Bristow, authorities searched Dank Dispensary and On Track Express. The dispensary is accused of selling marijuana without checking identification or requiring an Oklahoma medical marijuana card. The convenience store is accused of selling THC products, including marijuana pre-rolls. Marijuana products were seized. 2 people were arrested. That portion of the story is about businesses allegedly treating a medical marijuana system like open recreational sales. But the Tulsa raid, that's a much bigger story. During a routine inventory at Black Purple Kush Dispensary, Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority personnel reportedly discovered suspicious pills. The Organized Crime Task Force and Tulsa County Sheriff's Office became involved. Agents say they seized more than 1,000, that's a 1 with 3 zeros after it, fentanyl pills. They also seized heroin, ecstasy, cocaine, and 118 pounds of processed marijuana. The owner, Terrence Lewis, was arrested and charged with trafficking fentanyl, possession of drug proceeds, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and possession of a controlled dangerous substance. Those are charges. He's entitled to the presumption of innocence unless and until the state proves the case. But if the allegations are true, this was not a dispensary that occasionally made a paperwork mistake. This was allegedly a broad illegal drug operation operating behind a state-issued marijuana license. And that distinction matters. You can support legal medical marijuana and still demand that the state shut down anyone using a dispensary license as camouflage for a full-service drug operation. Oklahoma voters authorized medical marijuana. They did not authorize fentanyl shops with green crosses on the signs. When Oklahoma launched medical marijuana, the state created one of the fastest and least restrictive licensing environments in the country. Low barriers, rapid approvals, thousands of licenses being issued, weak early oversight. The result was an industry that expanded faster than the enforcement system surrounding it. Legitimate businesses entered the market, patients gained access, entrepreneurs invested money, but criminal justice or criminal organizations also recognized an opportunity. A legal license, agricultural land, warehouses, cash-heavy transactions, a product that could be moved into illegal markets outside of Oklahoma, and the state struggling to determine who was legitimate and who was not. The number of licensed grows has now fallen dramatically. Some closed because enforcement tightened. Some failed because the market was oversupplied. Some could not comply with new rules. Some simply went out of business. We should not pretend every closed grow was some part of organized crime, but the broader cleanup was necessary. Oklahoma's problem was never simply that we had too much marijuana. It was that a lightly supervised licensing system gave criminal enterprises a ready-made disguise. In this case, the inspection process may have worked exactly as intended. A routine OMMA inventory identified suspicious pills. The discovery triggered a larger investigation. Agents then allegedly found fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, ecstasy, marijuana, drug proceeds, and a firearm. That is what regulation is supposed to do. Separate the lawful operator from the criminal one. Protect the legitimate industry from people using its licenses covered. And protect the public from something much more dangerous than marijuana. If Oklahoma is no longer the Wild West of illegal marijuana operations, good. But we should still ask who allowed it to become the Wild West in the first place. And because we have spent the last couple of hours discussing shootings, socialism, the death of a senator, threats against judges, prosecutorial overreach, tenants losing water, and fentanyl inside a dispensary, let us end with something lighter, pun intended. Congress has decided to save daylight. I was unaware daylight was in federal custody, but here we are. The House passed legislation that would make daylight savings time permanent. No more changing the clocks twice a year. No more trying to remember whether spring goes forward or backward. No more discovering that the microwave, stove, coffee pot, and that one alarm clock you forgot existed all disagree on what time it is. Congress has finally found an issue that can unite America. Everybody hates changing the clocks. Unfortunately, Congress then had to decide which time to keep. So America, being America, is divided yet again. The permanent daylight savings time, people want more sunlight after work, more time for sports, more time to shop, more time to grill, more time to sit outside and complain about the mosquitoes. The permanent standard time people would like the sun to rise before their children arrive at school. They would prefer not to send a third grader to the bus stop in what appears to be the opening scene of a true crime documentary. Both sides may have a point. Permanent daylight savings time sounds wonderful in July. Ask everybody again at 7:45 on a January morning. We tried year-round daylight savings time during the energy crisis in the 1970s. People initially liked it, then winter arrived. Children were going to school in darkness. Public support collapsed. Congress changed it back because that is the great rule of American time policy. Everybody wants more daylight. Nobody agrees where to put it. The House passed the bill. The Senate still has to act. And one Senate Republican is already claiming that they're going to be blocking it. And the Senate previously passed permanent daylight savings time only to have the House do nothing. So Congress may once again spend months debating time while accomplishing absolutely nothing on schedule. Half the country will be mad no matter which way we go. The only question is whether they are angry because it gets dark at 5 in the afternoon or because the sun does not rise until they have already answered 6 emails. And that brings us to the end of today's show, including overtime. Different stories, same recurring lesson. Institutions do not earn trust because of their title, badge, license, office, robe, or balance sheet. They earn it by following rules, showing their work, protecting the people who rely on them, and accepting consequences when the safeguards fail. That's not cynicism. That's actual citizenship. I'm Rick Robinson. Thank you for spending this time with me on this wonderful Chat Lives Matter Day Wednesday. I'll be back here later tonight for Kingdom and Country. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And I will see you later tonight. This has been the Rick Robinson Show.
Truth bombs drop in a red state parade. From the plains to the power, he's speaking it loud with a mic and a mission that makes us proud. Talk for the people, talk that's real. The Rick Robinson Show, where we say what we feel.
Say goodnight, Gracie.